Hello, my name's Searle and I'm an IFMGA guide. I live out in Chamonix, France. I originally did my course through the British Mountain Guides and I've been living out here for the past 15 years. And in the last 3 or 4 years since I've been guiding, I've got to observe a whole bunch of different ways of doing things, from British guides, American guides, Italian, French, Canadian, a whole bunch of different ways of doing it, and it kind of gave me the idea for doing a video like this. So this is really a deep dive into different systems of how to shorten the rope for alpine climbing. Now, why would you shorten the rope for alpine climbing? That's a great question. Well, if you're doing a classic alpine route, let's say AD, or difficile minus, for example, there might be different sections of that route that require you to use different techniques. For example, there might be long sections of exposed but easy walking. There might be sections of short pitches of easy climbing. There might be long pitches of climbing. And you don't necessarily need a full 50, 60, 40 meters of rope, however long the rope that you need for the route is. You don't necessarily need all that rope out at all times. On certain routes, you have to cross a glacier to get to the start of the climb, and you might need a 50-meter rope for the route, but you don't need 50 meters of rope actually out on the glacier. And in fact, you need a reserve of rope at each end so that you can perform a rescue. So we're going to look at a whole bunch of different systems, and hopefully you're going to get a clearer idea about how to do this so you can build your own system that is replicable, safe, and you understand the pros and cons of that system too. So basically, gonna get ready as if I would be out in the mountains rather than in my kind of dingy basement. So I've got all my gear on, I've got my harness on, I've got my helmet on, I've got my backpack on, which is basically the stuff that kind of gets in the way of doing this. So it's definitely worth practicing how to do these skills kind of with this setup so you can understand how it all integrates. If you just put a harness on and try and tie coils, then you won't know how much you have to put the rope over your helmet, and if you don't have your backpack on, you won't know how the rope interacts with the backpack. So practice kind of in this setup, and then you'll be more comfortable when you actually have to do it out in the mountains. So here I've got a 30-meter rope. It doesn't matter too much the length of the rope that you're going to use, but I'd certainly say practice with a decent amount of rope so that you can really understand kind of how it feels to have a lot of rope wrapped around your body. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to tie in to the rope, and what I like to tie in with is a rethreaded figure of 8. It's kind of the industry standard knot for tying in, and I like to finish it with a stopper knot. And there's a couple of systems that I think that you really should have a stopper knot for, and I'll explain a bit about that later on in this video. So we're tied into the rope now, and we're going to talk about the first system, which is taking coils, tying off the coils, and then tying back into the rope with a clove hitch. This is the system that I was taught when I did the British Mountain Guides IFMGA training, and this is the system that I go back to a lot, bearing in mind that I have tried out many other different systems as well, and this for me seems to tick most of the boxes of what I want. So when taking coils, it's a really good idea to put your hood up first, because it basically keeps them a lot neater as you do it. So put your hood up, and then you also don't have to fish your hood out of the coils afterwards. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start with that rope going up over on my left hand side, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my hand in between my belly and the rope, and I'm going to push out so that my thumb rests in my belly button. Okay, this should be a good length for most people, but you know, experiment with this. If it feels too short, then you could make it slightly longer by pushing it further down. If it feels too long, again, you could push your hand further up. But for me, the belly button works really well. And here what I'm going to do is wrap over my fingers and then over my head. So over my fingers and over my head. Over fingers, over head. Now, once you feel comfortable with that motion, you can start to speed it up a little bit. So you feel a little bit more comfortable in the motion that you need to do to get it over your head. And remember, in alpine climbing, speed is super, super useful. It's what keeps you away from afternoon thunderstorms. It's what means that you can do bigger routes. So learning to do these things quickly is a really important thing. Okay, so let's go full speed now. Held up by a little tangle there. So that's 12 coils, or half of this 30-meter rope. So the next step from here for this system is to tighten it up so that this rope comes up a little bit closer to your body, so there's not a big loop there. Now I'm going to post my right hand through the coils here, like this, and I'm going to take this rope in my right hand and pass it across so it crosses over here. Now, with my right hand, I'm going to put my arm down through the coils like this so I can grab this loop of the rope. Now, this is super easy to do even with gloves on. You pull out a decent bite of rope like this, and we want to trap both of these ropes now. So we're going to go over to the left, behind, we're going to make a little tunnel here, and we're going to go down like this. Okay, I'm going to pull that tight there, like that. Now this rope is coming out of the chest coils now. So in this situation here, the pull is quite high. If I were to be traversing on a glacier and somebody fell in a crevasse, I'm going to get pulled flat onto my face onto the snow, which is not ideal. So here what I need to do is lower that pull so it's onto my harness, so I have a much better chance of holding that fall. So here I'm going to take a carabiner that has a grid system to it. So basically it has a hole down here for the harness loop and a hole up here for whatever else. This is an old BD magnetron carabiner which has two magnetic lockers on the side of it, so it's quite difficult to accidentally unscrew that. Other carabiners that could be really good for this are there's one by Grivel which has two gates on it, or there could be a triple action carabiner that's out there that also has a captive loop in the bottom of here. I'd look for something that has both a captive loop and a non-screw gate function, so at least a twist lock or a triple action carabiner. So here we're going to clip this to the belay loop like so, and then we're going to tie a clove hitch onto that carabiner so it's tied off here on a clove hitch, and we've got a little bit of working slack there so that that pull could be lower down or it could be higher up. Now this loop here, you can leave it unclipped like this, that's no worries. It isn't really going to work its way out, but you could also clip it onto the gate side of the carabiner like this. Okay, and that's just going to keep it a bit tidier. Everything's going to be a little bit better having it clipped in. But it's really important that you have it on the gate side, because if we have this under load, then we can still pop that gate out of the carabiner whilst this clove hitch is fully loaded, and we can take the reserve of rope out, which is super important if you're on a glacier, somebody's fallen in, you're holding them, let's say somebody else is coming to help you to rig a rescue, you want to be able to take the reserve of rope out and give it to them to be able to do the rescue whilst you're holding that fall. The other thing that you might want to do in this situation is be clipped to an anchor here. So I'm clipped with a clove hitch into my anchor. I've got this loop that's tying off the coils in here. I might want to take this off and be able to ditch these coils, taking them off, and then I can be put on belay on the side next to my figure of 8. So one of the pros to this system is if we are holding somebody in a crevasse and we're going to build an anchor here to transfer the weight of the rope onto the anchor, we can put our micro traction on here and test the anchor as holding, and we can also take out some of this slack without ever having to come off this clove hitch. A super nice way of doing it, in my opinion, because if you do weight that anchor and it fails, then you want to make sure that it's tied off around you, because if you pop their weight into the anchor and it immediately fails, okay, if the system isn't tied off here, you're going to be getting a really violent yank, potentially throttling you or causing you some really bad pain whilst you're trying to hold them because that anchor's just failed. So the nice thing about this system is we can transfer the load whilst always staying clipped in here. And if we want to give ourselves a little bit of slack, we can really easily do that with that load transferred onto there by just pulling a little bit through there, and we're never completely coming out of that system. So tied off chest coils like this, where the rope is actually tied off around, the loops are tied off here, it's quite nice because you can take the coils off really easily. You just simply pop them off your head and you can let them hang down whilst you have a little break. So you can have that rope off you can have a little break, a sit down, and you're not having that rope kind of around you, and it can kind of feel a little bit kind of claustrophobic sometimes, having a big bit of rope around your neck. So you can take them off and you can easily put them back on, whereas if they're not blocked off, you can't do that as easily. I find from experience as well that keeping the coils tied off like this, when I'm down climbing or doing weird kind of chimney moves or things where your hands are quite low, pushing yourself up onto a shelf, for example, the coils stay fairly neat and they're not able to fall off my shoulder. And yeah, it just generally stays a little bit neater when you're doing kind of weird stuff. So some of the downsides to this system are it does take a little bit longer than not tying off the coils. You have to do a knot here and then a knot to lower that pull. And if you're not used to how to do it, you can kind of do it wrong or you can forget how it's done. So you do need to practice this system quite a lot before you can actually head out there and try and use it in real life. But for me, as I said, it ticks quite a lot of those boxes, which is it keeps the ropes neat and tidy, it blocks everything off, it gives me the opportunity to move things around if I want to, and I can take those coils off really easily and have a rest and then put them back on. Okay, so the next system that we're going to look at is unblocked chest coils, where it's not tied off here. And this is something that I use occasionally, especially if I'm kind of chopping and changing between different rope lengths quite a lot. And I feel like, you know, I'm going to be taking the rope off and redoing the coils at some point anyway. If I was doing a lot of climbing with coils on, I probably wouldn't default to this system. I'd rather have them tied off so I can, again, take them off, change layers, etc., etc. But it is a useful system to know, and it is pretty simple. So we take our coils as we did before, and all we're simply going to do here is either tie a clove hitch into our fancy carabiner. And the nice thing about that is, yes, we can quickly and easily change the length on this side of this clove hitch and adjust through. So for example, if you're climbing up a short pitch and you thought you had enough rope to get to a little stance, but you just need a couple of extra meters, what you can do is just drop a couple of coils like that and just pull it through this clove hitch here and get the belayer to take it in or to, you know, manage that rope back down again. And you've just quickly adjusted the length of that rope without having to do an extra knot. This is often how you see French guides doing it. I don't have a problem with it really, apart from the fact that, yeah, I do find that the coils get a little bit more messy, especially when you're doing kind of weird motions and moving around. For me, it's not the gold standard, but it's certainly quick and easy, and it does have the benefit of not having to tie an extra knot. Another system here that we can tie off with is tying the rope in through the harness. So I'll show you a couple of different ways that you can do this here. The first is a sheet bend. So what we're going to do is we're going to post it through the rope loop here, and then we're going to wrap down and come through this loop, and then we're going to post this through here like this. And that's called a sheet bend finish. And this is a system that's kind of been developed by the Austrians over the years, and I quite like it. It's super nice and lightweight. You don't have to have a carabiner on your harness. Once you get used to tying it, it actually works pretty well. One of the downsides is though, if I want to adjust the length of the rope, I basically have to go to an untied off position where I'm take the rope out completely, and all I have is the rope wrapped around my body. So if I were to fall off, or if my partner was to fall in a crevasse, for example, then I'm in a pretty bad situation. The other thing for me is using a rope loop in that situation where you're putting a spreading load on it. I would suggest just putting a stopper knot, even if you don't use a stopper knot normally. The reason for that is putting a ring load on a figure of 8 loop like this. For me, that could potentially roll that knot open, and if this tail is too short, there is a potential that that is a bad situation that you could find yourself in. Having a stopper knot basically stops that from happening, because this knot means that the figure of 8 can't roll past it. Another way to do this is to tie a bowline through the belay loop. So you start with a bite going through like this. You're going to come up through there. You're going to come around behind everything and down through like that. Now we've got a bowline tying off us there. You could also clip that loop back to the harness, you know, so you're on a bowline here, tied, you know, doubled up, and then this loop is clipped back to your harness like that. So you're more tied in, kind of using the rope rather than clipped in with a clove hitch, for example. So if you don't have one of those fancy carabiners, you could also use 2 HMS carabiners like this with the gates opposing. Some people say that's unnecessary. I would say that actually I have seen these kind of unscrew over time, especially when they're down on your harness. So having 2 opposing lockers like that is not a bad idea. But it could be overkill for some people. They just feel like that's never going to happen. It's never going to unscrew and come open, but it is something to consider. Another way that we can tie the rope off here is to use a small overhand knot, for example, in there. Could also be an Alpine butterfly if you absolutely love tying those and you feel like you need to over an overhand. For me, I don't really use an Alpine butterfly because I just find an overhand much quicker and easier to tie, and basically does the same job. So looking at this system of clipping in with an overhand knot or an Alpine butterfly and then using a carabiner to clip that to your harness, I know in the American system they teach this, and they say that you should build your snow anchor and then you can transfer the load straight onto the anchor here and you can unclip from there, and then you can save your micro traction or whichever device you're going to be using for further down the system. For me, I tend to teach people to transfer the load directly onto a micro traction rather than putting the load onto the anchor first. And the reason for that is I find it's easier to go straight into a 3-to-1 haul, potentially with somebody pulling at the lip of the crevasse to pull that person up as well. And then if I need more mechanical advantage, I move that 3-to-1 into a 6-to-1 system. Now, if this is all getting a little bit complicated for you, no worries. There's going to be some more videos about this stuff coming up from me, and there's loads of stuff out there already about these kind of techniques. For me, one of the downsides with doing that, once I put the weight onto the snow anchor and unclip from it, if for some reason the snow anchor were to pull through a few seconds after I've unclipped, for example, I'm left in, again, quite a bad situation, especially if I don't have blocked coils, because I'm getting pulled by somebody from coils that are basically around my body. So that's why for me, I like to use a clove hitch, because I can stay on the rope for as long as possible and I can make sure that that anchor is holding. I can also stay clipped in if I wanted to back up the anchor. So for example, if I wanted to bury my rucksack or a stuff sack or something to back up that snow anchor, I can stay clipped in with my clove hitch and just give myself a little bit of slack to go back and build a better system. You could also do that. You could also unclip from there and immediately put a clove hitch on to back it up as well. That's fine, but there is just that slight moment in the system there where you're basically not clipped in with anything other than either tied off coils or non-tied off coils. So another system that I've seen is taking the coils and having your strand coming underneath the arm and then the the kind of climbing live rope coming over the shoulder, and then you're going to come through the belay loop and maybe through the rope loop as well, and then you're going to come up through here, and then you're going to tie an overhand on this rope loop here, and then this can either be clipped in, and you can also then, if you wanted to, add a clove hitch into here. Now, for me, the downsides with this system are, if I'm pulling on this rope here, it's pulling down and cinching up like this, and it's putting me into quite a crunched position. So if this clove hitch wasn't here and it was pulling directly on there, it's kind of putting me into not the most comfortable position, I'm going to say. So you really do need that extra clove hitch there. The other downsides for me with this system is it's putting quite a lot of strain on my neck here. I can feel it already, it's kind of pulling down quite hard, which is quite nice because it stops the coils from becoming messy, but I could definitely tell that after a few hours of using this system, I'm going to feel quite uncomfortable. This is a system that I have experimented with a little bit, and I just haven't really got on with it as much, so I kind of default back to that first one that I was teaching you at the start of the video. So this is just another variation on carrying coils. I've made them just a little bit longer, a little bit slacker. I'm going to tie them off as I did in the first video like that. I'm going to put my clove hitch on down here as well. And then I'm actually going to pop my other arm through so that these coils are sat on the top of my bag like that. And the nice thing about this is I don't feel like I've got any pressure on my neck. I'm still staying fairly comfortable. And the coils are blocked. I don't feel like there's anything that can really go wrong with this system. And it's still fairly easy to just pop one arm through so that then you can adjust the coils if you need to, taking a few off at a time, tying those off again. Again, I'm still staying on this clove hitch down here. Tie that one off, pop that one through, and then I can pull this extra slack through the clove hitch like that. I basically never came out of that system. So the final system that we're going to look at is stuffing the rope into the bag, and there are pros and cons of this system. The pros are, if you do it well, it can actually be really easy to pull out rope from the rucksack. Also, you don't have rope around your neck, so it's kind of saving your neck a little bit. The rope can't really get messy because it's in the bag, it can't get damaged, it can't get wet, but to shorten the rope again, it takes a little bit longer. So, a few moments longer to shorten that rope because you have to take the bag off and then re-stuff it into the bag and then tie back in at the appropriate length. So let's have a quick look at how you shorten the rope by stuffing it in the bag. This is probably one of the most awkward designs of bag to use for this system because it's got a roll top closure, which is nice. It's kind of quite weatherproof, but it means that there isn't really a hole, a zip hole that the rope can easily kind of be pulled out of. So you are compromising the closure of the bag a little bit with this type of system, but I'll show you with this anyway. So we've got the bag open and we're going to start from our tie-in loop, and we're just going to stuff the rope in however much we want. We can measure it out in arm spans or half arm spans to know exactly how much is going in there. Maybe you've measured the rope out before. One of the key points here is to make sure that the rope is on the top of everything. If you put a pair of gloves or something else important on top, either it's not going to pull out of the bag very easily, or it's going to pull that item out of the bag and it's going to disappear off down the mountain. So once I've stuffed the rope into the bag, I'm going to kind of close it up loosely, and I'm just going to double check that it's kind of pulling out okay. It seems to be fine. And here I can then either clip in with a clove hitch. Remember to always tie in with a figure of 8 as well on the end. So I can either clip in with a clove hitch, I could do a sheet bend finish, or I could do a bowline finish on the harness. I could use 2 locking carabiners, whichever system you want to kind of clip back into the rope here. So now I have the rope kind of stuffed into the bag, it's coming out of the top, and ideally I should be able to pull it out quite easily, like so, and then I can kind of lengthen it a little bit by rolling it through that clove hitch, for example. And yeah, it's quite a nice system for being able to lengthen the rope. But as I said, to then shorten it again, you need to take the bag off, undo the rucksack, and then stuff the rope back in. So that's the kind of real major downside to this system, is it's not super easy to quickly shorten the rope. So for me, the final thing to talk about in this video is using a device or a prusik to clip into the rope here so that it's easy to adjust through that device. Problem with these, even these kind of style ones that have the teeth on them, like the sort of grooves on them rather than the teeth, is that if you put a certain load through the rope, it could strip the sheath of the rope. So you have to be very careful about which device you're going to use. I know that the climbing technology roll and click, or roll and, I'll put a photo of it here, is quite a good device for this. And I do see a lot of Italian guides using that system. I think it, you know, that can work really well. It's very nice when the rope is stuffed into the bag to have a system that you can easily put rope out if you need to. For me, a toothed device like a Petzl Micro or Nano Traction or a tib lock is not really the ideal solution here. I feel like you could damage the rope in certain falling situations. So yeah, I'd be very careful about using that to kind of clip into the rope here. I do see some people using a prusik to clip in there. And for me, I don't have a huge problem with that, other than the fact that I wouldn't normally trust my entire existence on a single prusik. I would definitely rather be kind of clipped in with a knot. I would probably rather just use a clove hitch. You can get into a situation, for example, if you're getting pulled up out of a crevasse here, and this is going over a snow lip or something, this can just start pulling this prusik down. So yeah, for me, not an ideal solution, but you know, it's also not terrible. So if it's something that you do, you know, that's fine. But for me, it's not what I would use. So that was a fairly exhaustive look into different systems used by different countries for tying into the rope and then shortening it for alpine climbing. It's super important to be able to know those different systems and when to deploy them, the pros and cons of those. So hopefully you found that useful. Maybe you use another system, maybe you could describe it down in the comments. Maybe there's a video showing that system. I'm always interested to learn more myself. Thanks very much for watching. Make sure you give it a thumbs up. That really helps people to see this video. And if you can share it, that's great. And all that fun stuff. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.